OMG. Fighting games. Or just games in general. These are not fighting games, these are violent games. So, today, I reacted to this guy named Pain Explainer. That video may go up way later. This video may also go up way later, but I reacted to a guy named Pain Explainer. And he talked about every banned video game, disturbing banned video game, and I was just so curious to learn more about these games. One of the main games that caught my eye and stuck with me was Manhunt, and this game is supposed to be the most terrifying game of all time. And I'm like, you know what? I might cop one of these games one day and play them. And so today we're on the GOAT himself, Gameranx, the GOAT. I'm letting y'all know, the GOAT. And we have 20 most violent video games ever. Let's get straight into this reaction, bro. Let's go.
Video games have a lot of violence in them. That's just
Yeah, we know.
part of it. But some of them have way more than others, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanks, 20 of the most violent video games ever. We're starting off at number 20, going hard with the Resident Evil 2 remake. The Resident Evil series has always been gory, but this game pushed the series to a whole new level. The kind of damage you can do to zombies in this game is obscene. You can shoot off their arms, legs, blow
Damn.
off chunks of their heads, leave their limbs hanging off by bloody strings. The game just has some of the most varied
Damn.
and dynamic damage
He's not going to show us a single thing about that, huh? Yeah, he's definitely not.
you can inflict on enemies in the series. Some of the cutscene violence is absolutely gnarly, too. Like the opening where you find the dead guy with half his face sliced open, or the part where you pull the guy through the
Damn.
shutter and his entrails are hanging out. Later
Oh my
games in
God.
the series toned down the violence to a degree.
Yeah, bro. Something about, seeing human guts, like all that stuff, it's so traumatizing, yet that's what we are. We're a bunch of blobs of meat and flesh and all this disgusting stuff, and when we really start to see, like, oh crap, like this stuff is disgusting, man. Like, we're a bunch of cells. Like, what the hell is this? Like, this is a funny world. Oh my gosh, why do we even have all this stuff? And yeah.
Resident Evil 3 remake toned it down in terms of zombie damage, and while a lot of gross stuff happens in the 4 remake and an 8, nothing quite on the level of the Resident Evil 2 remake happens.
That looks scary. And kinda, bro, can we not get ads, bro? My goodness.
Moving on to number 19, Gears of War, and I have 2 words for you here: chainsaw bayonet. That alone is enough to make Gears of War one of the most violent games ever. Because seriously, even now, it makes me wince a little bit every time I chainsaw some unsuspecting grub in half. It's especially bad if you do it from
Ooh.
behind and go from bottom to top. That's hardly the only thing that makes the game, and the rest of the series, honestly, so violent. Grenades explode enemies into bloody chunks. Shotguns vaporize body parts. There's limbs flying, blood gushing everywhere from everything. But you're doing it to subterranean monsters called locusts, so it's fine. Later games in the series came up with newer and better ways to turn enemies into red mulch, but the original was the real innovator here. It never really got noticeably worse in terms of the actual level of violence after the first game. Usually long-running series tend to tone this kind of stuff down after a while, but luckily Gears hasn't really. It just hasn't gotten particularly worse either. And number 18 is Mad World. This Wii exclusive action game looks like the anime
Wii.
version of Sin City, with the violence to match. It's black and white and red all over, because the blood's still red, and it's everywhere. Your guy has a chainsaw arm
my
and a big
God.
knife and one hell of a love of context kills.
Wee.
It's one of those games where you're impaling guys with street lights and throwing them out of barrels.
Okay, yeah, this.
But you can also
Yeah.
chop them up into pieces, rip them limb from limb with your bare hands. It's absolutely disgusting. At least it would be if it wasn't so over-the-top goofy. It's like if Ricky O was in
Yeah.
black and white and had a pretty killer rap soundtrack, honestly. Game's basically if Manhunt didn't take itself so seriously. You're in a death game, and the only way to win is to rack up points. It does have forced motion controls, though, so that holds back the potential a bit. But it's a great action game, and it has some absolutely absurd violence. At number 17 is Fallout 3. You know, after a while, It's easy to take for granted just how crazy violent Fallout 3, and by extension New Vegas, really is. Nearly every enemy encounter ends with someone losing a limb or an eyeball flying at the camera or a piece of brain matter. People have the structural integrity of, a piece of paper dipped in strawberry jelly. Except for, they're a little more likely to explode into chunks than paper. The VAT system really lays it on thick, too. It's not just that we're blowing people up. The game is showing us all the grisly detail in glorious slow motion. It would be sickening as hell if the games didn't somehow make it work. Violence is just part of Fallout. The original games were pretty gross, honestly, and Fallout 3 managed to adapt all that to 3D pretty well, almost too well.
Be careful.
Oh my gosh.
At number 16 is X-Men Origins Wolverine. The fact that Wolverine managed to go so long without a mature rated game is a crime. But that blunder was finally rectified with X-Men Origins Wolverine. The movie sucked, but the game was great. Wolverine's whole deal is that he's a guy who has giant claws coming out of his hands, and because of that, violence is baked in. That said, he's a superhero, so his many violent rampages on the page and on the screen remain mostly bloodless. Video games in general, a little more permissive, however. Giving a game an M rating isn't a kiss of death that giving certain movies an R rating is. So there's a little more game devs can get away with, and the guys at Raven Software really went nuts with the violence here. Wolverine can slash enemies to pieces, rip them apart, slam them in every which way.
Damn, I wonder how brutal this game was. It's a whole Marvel game. I wonder.
It's a bloodbath. You kill so many people, but
it's like,
what is more violent is what happens to Logan himself. They used his healing factor to its full potential here.
Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. Yeah, never mind. This game is probably disgusting. Oh my gosh. Oh my god.
Many battles leave Wolverine as little more than a bloody skeleton, and once they're over, you actually get to see him restore his muscle tissue and flesh in pretty impressive detail. It's not the best action game, but it's really entertaining. It's got some over-the-top violence.
Oh, god.
To kill guys like you, but I'm one of a kind.
At number 15 is Ninja Gaiden 2. Later versions of the game got the level of bloody and gore toned down pretty.
Ninja Gaiden 3. Dude, that was the bloodiest game I've ever played as a kid. I was like, 7 years old, and dude, the guy was begging for his life, bro, and we just sliced that dude's head off, bro. It was disgusting, bro.
Pretty significantly, but the original Xbox 360 version of Ninja Gaiden 2 had pretty absurd amounts of violence. These guys are more blood than man. Every little nitpick sends a geyser of blood in the air. You can and will chop off arms and legs by the dozens, and it makes it especially gross when the enemies keep trying to kill you even after you've inflicted a grievous wound on them. Armless guys will try to stab you. Legless enemies crawl on the ground, try to pin you down with an explosive kamikaze attack. These guys really want to kill you. At the end of a fight, you're left standing in a sea of blood and body parts. It's legitimately gross sometimes because you kill so many people in this game. Sure, they're all evil ninjas, but after a while, it's hard not to feel a little sorry for them. Especially after a particularly powerful combo leaves just a torso hanging up in the air. Stop it, man. I'm pretty sure he's dead. And number 14 is Dead Space 2. On a technical level, the Dead Space remake might be a more violent game, but Dead Space 2 contains some of the series' more gross elements. You know what I'm talking about here, the giant needle to the eye.
Oh
the
my
part
god. I don't know.
where a guy turns into a necromorph right in front of you, his face basically explodes. That's all pretty gross. The violence in the remake may be more realistic, but at the same time, Dead Space 2 is a little more shocking. It's a series built on violence. The central gimmick of the games is cutting off enemy limbs, but the thing that keeps it from being totally disgusting is the alien monsters you're fighting kind of only vaguely resemble the human beings they once were. They're gangly, bony monsters, so when you cut them limb from limb, it doesn't feel as gross. But when they kill you, there's some impressively disgusting dead animations here.
My
Isaac
God.
Clarke has a lot of ways to die. And to me, the most shocking stuff is that. In that regard, the first two games have pretty comparable levels of violence. But man, that eyeball thing, I dream about. That gets me every time.
No, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it.
And number 13 is The Punisher.
Oh
You
my
can't
God.
have a list like this without mentioning the Volition Punisher game. It's not necessarily the shooting that makes it violent. It's more the interrogations, where you can grab an enemy and coerce them into revealing information by threatening them with all sorts of deadly tools and hazards in the environment. Of course, the point here is that you're trying to get information, but you're the Punisher. You're not the friendly cuddler or whatever. You're gonna kill these guys, and some of these deaths are pretty nasty, at least in concept. In execution, it is low poly model spraying blood, and the blood is kind of just a texture. It's all pretty tame by modern standards, but apparently this was too much at the time, and the game got pretty heavily censored. Now all the kill animations have this filter over them, and the camera goes kind of nuts to obscure the action. It's a strange choice, because the violence really wasn't that extreme. So the crazy filtering in the camera actually, I think, make it's more gory and visceral than it actually is. Most of them are just kind of intentionally goofy or over the top. It's a violent game for sure, but the censorship makes it feel worse.
Okay, I do drugs.
Oh my god.
Let me go. I can talk to the guys in 2B for you.
You've been rehabbed.
Oh my gosh. Bro, these games are... Bro, can we not get ads? These games are insane. Which one should I play?
At number 12, A Soldier of Fortune 2, Raven Software strikes again with one of the goriest, most disgusting FPS games of all time. The actual game itself, pretty dry. It's a 2000s era
Bro, I am a literal scaredy cat. Like, bro, I'm scared of everything. So it's like, holy shit, bro.
military shooter, but what makes it unique is the surprisingly realistic levels of gore. They made a special point about trying to make the violence as realistic as possible at the time, and there's 16 points of damage, which honestly, still kind of impressive to this day. Even with the game being as archaic looking as it is, some of the violence is still pretty nasty. Using a knife in particular stands out. Whenever you cut somebody, it makes a gash appear that just bleeds profusely. Shooting guys causes big blood decals all over the walls. Arms get blasted off. Torsos explode in chunks. But the most disgusting thing of all is the headshots where you blow the front half of the guy's head off. It's much more disgusting than your standard decapitation. Doesn't look like much now, but back then the stuff was pretty impressive, and honestly, still kind of is. At number 11 is Turok 2. Nintendo is mostly a company known for kids stuff, especially in the SNES Nintendo 64 era, but they still managed to have some of the most grotesquely violent games of all time on their systems. The stuff Turok 2 managed to get away with is frankly insane. I mean, just look at the cerebral bore, which works exactly as advertised. You shoot a dart into the bad guy's brain, and it starts drilling. It sends blood, brain matter, flying out of their face, and that looks like what you'd expect it to look like on the Nintendo 64. So, yeah, the enemy models have like 20 polygons total. It still manages to be a lot. I think it's the sound effects that do a lot of the heavy lifting, but, I mean, it comes together, or at least works, I guess is the, I don't know. That's hardly the only disgusting thing in the game, though. You can blast off enemy limbs, shoot holes in their chest, just do all kinds of horrible things. The only thing that made any of this even remotely acceptable is that you're fighting monsters and not people. Ratings boards let a lot slide if you're not killing people. If there's zombies or monsters, man, have at it. At number 10 is The Darkness 2. You'd think the more exaggerated comic book visuals of the second Darkness game would make it less violent, but no, it's way more gross than the first game. In this one, you're ripping guys limb from limb, you're impaling them with rods and cutting them in half with car doors. It's a non-stop orgy of bloody violence, is what it is. The kill animations are just insane in this game. The serpents that manifest as part of your darkness powers are so over-the-top brutal with their kills. And you're going to see it a lot. You're going to see them a lot. There's so much heart-ripping in here. You're doing it to corpses. You're doing it to guys that's still alive. So many chests are getting punctured. They're still beating hearts are removed and eaten. It's over the top, but it's gross. Even if there is a bit of a visceral thrill to being this much of an overpowered monster, it might be seen as a kind of forgettable game, but the violence you can inflict is burned into my memory. At number 9 is Shadow of Rome. The PlayStation 2 hidden gem from Capcom is still, for my money, probably the best gladiator combat game out there. The combat's kind of a precursor to Dead Rising, except instead of committing grievous injuries to zombies, you're doing it to these roided out meat mountains. Pretty much with identical results, though. If anything, maybe even worse. Blood gets everywhere, limbs and arms get cut off. Describing it just doesn't do justice to how violent this game is. It's like Mad World without the comedic tone. Still intentionally over the top, but in a different, more exploitative and gross way. It is satisfying, though. Your ability to just brutalize your enemies, it's something else. Even without any blood, it looks super nasty. Like when you break someone's arm and hang it on one guy's side, flopping around uselessly. Yeah, Look at that. Yeah, there's some more boring parts, but when you're in the arena, there's no combat in games quite like Shadow of Rome. And number 8 is Hotline Miami. Here's a game that proves that when it comes to violence, fidelity doesn't matter. In Hotline Miami, all the guys you're killing are these tiny little sprites. You barely even see them. They're just a jumble of pixels, but even with something that looks that cute, still manages to be almost obscene how violent
I thought that was
it
a
is.
car.
Hotline Miami is also a game that revels in violence. It's swift and brutal, and it makes it even more effective. You
Putting
can die
this game at
quickly, but
8
you
is
can kill
crazy.
just as fast. And depending on what kind of weapon you're using, you'll leave your enemies as a different variety of blood mess on the floor. It's impossible to describe exactly what makes Hotline Miami feel so gross when the violence is so simple. It's the splashes of blood and the brutal animations that do all the work. Seeing your handiwork after a particularly large fight, seeing all the mangled bodies on the floor and the blood coating the walls, it's hard not to see this as one of the most violent games of all time, even if all that
Damn.
violence is just a whole bunch of red pixels.
How bad is this?
And number 7 is Splatterhouse. If you're old and you grew up in the 90s, yeah, that's old now. Sorry. You probably remember seeing this game. It's an unapologetically gross beat 'em up full of viscera and blood. The arcade version was extra gross with mutilated bodies hanging in the background and even more grotesque enemies. The Genesis version of the game was toned down a little bit, but as a kid it's still, really gross. The actual gameplay is nothing to write home about. The game was more about the visuals, and they remain pretty impressively disgusting. Or maybe they're just goofy, I don't know. It depends on where and when you were when you first saw it. For me, it's still gross. The gore-filled backgrounds and bizarre enemies still kind of creep me out to this day, even though, by any objective measure, it's really impossible to take any of it seriously. You're a guy in a Jason mask, beating up mutant babies in a blood sewer. It's ridiculous. But the grungy graphics and copious gallons of blood are still kind of creepy, in that over-the-top Halloween haunted house sort of way.
I don't know about putting this game over all those other games we just saw. This game is.
And number 6 is Thrill Kill.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna say the faces in Street Fighter, the defeat faces in Street Fighter were freaking scary. Those were fucking scary. Those were just absolutely hideous. I used to get so afraid. So you could say they're pretty scary.
The PS1 game has a unique distinction of being so violent that it never even came out. Yeah, at the last minute, EA backed out of it, presumably to avoid the inevitable backlash the game was going to get from parent groups or things
Thrill
like
Kill.
that. Violent. And number 6 is Thrill Kill. The
Yeah.
PS1 game has a unique distinction
I
of
heard
being
about
so
this.
violent that it never even came out. Yeah, at the last minute, EA backed out of it, presumably to avoid the inevitable backlash the game was going to get from parent groups or things like that. They may not have published the game, but that didn't stop anyone from playing it. It leaked pretty early. People were actually playing this thing in the 90s, if you can believe it. It's a game with a lot of mystique, enough to earn a spot on the list, but is it actually that violent? Well, kind of. There's plenty of blood for a PlayStation 1 game, and the violence can be pretty extreme, at least for a game as old as this one. But its reputation as one of the most disgusting games of all time is mostly unfounded. That doesn't mean it's not gross. But the visuals don't do it any favors. It's just a little too rudimentary to come off as legitimately violent. The funniest thing about this game is actually at the start. To play it, you have to agree to terms and conditions by pressing X and square at the same time. It tells you to proceed at your own risk. You put your life in your hands playing Thrill Kill. If you die, that's on you. And number 5 is Manhunt. Another legendary entry in the violent video games canon is, of course, Rockstar's Manhunt. This thing was created to court controversy, essentially. Closest thing to the murder simulator so many pearl-clutching senators and lawyers were clucking about in the early 2000s and even the late 90s, I guess. You're a death row inmate who's been ordered around by a sadistic director. The only way to survive is to kill hunters who are after you. The whole thing's being filmed on CCTV.
These streets are being patrolled by gangs. They're scum, just like you.
The
And they're here to hunt you down.
Yeah, they're scum, just like you. What the? Okay.
And cut you up.
The game has this grungy snuff film energy, and it feels about right because the real star of the show is the executions. This is the part of the game that got everyone's attention. You use stuff like scissors, blunt objects, and memorably a plastic bag, and you use them to kill guys. They're hunting you, so it's, I guess, self-defense, but yeah. Depending on how long you hold a button down, it changes how violent the kill is. If you only hold it down a little, the kill's fairly straightforward. If you hold it down all the way to level 3, the takedowns look like something out of a slasher movie. You basically are a slasher in this game, a remorseless killer, but you're not some unkillable force. You're actually extremely vulnerable, so it's pretty risky to go for the really violent kills. But of course, it's also what you're here for, right? You want to see them, even if it gets you killed more often than not. And number 4 is Dead Island 2. Violence in games doesn't get much more amusingly gross than this. One of the big selling points for the game was how the game used a special gore system called FLESH. That's an acronym. It's a rather forced one as well. A fully locational evisceration system for humanoids. Come on, guys. But the violence is procedurally generated depending on a bunch of different factors, and it is actually pretty impressive. If you got a blunt weapon, you can break limbs, smash teeth in. If you got blades, you can cut out ribbons of flesh and chop up limbs into bloody strips. Things get really disgusting when you add in acid and melt chunks of zombie flesh off and expose their organs. This game has some of the straight up grossest stuff I've ever seen. It really is a marvel of technology too, and what makes it really impressive is it does feel like you're the one doing the damage. If they weren't zombies, it'd probably be one of the most sickening games of all time. Even with zombies, it's still pretty gross, but at least they're already kind of dead. It's a minor distinction, but it really does make a difference, not just to the player, but especially to the ESRB. At number 3 is God of War 3. The God of War series has always been very violent, but the third game reigns supreme in shock value. The higher resolution textures and more detailed enemy models means we really get a good, detailed look at Kratos' bloody rampage. Stuff that was once kind of funny, like when you stomp on a Cyclops' eye in the old games, it's a little grosser in this one. Cuts look a lot more realistic. The damage you inflict is a lot more gross. It makes what Kratos does to some of the gods especially disgusting, too. Killing Helios deserves special mention. When you rip his head off, you can literally see the skin of his neck tearing as it separates from his shoulders.
Oh, that is horrible. That is disgustingly terrible to watch. Who would want to watch this stuff?
It's nasty. There's another scene later on I'm pretty sure I can't show here. I mean, I probably can't show a lot of it. What Kratos does to Hercules' face, just horror games don't get this disturbing. And number 2 is The Last of Us Part 2. Seems to be that one of Naughty Dog's major goals with this game was to make the violence as unpleasant as possible, and man, did they succeed at that. It's not just that there's gross violence here and disturbing scenes. The thing that makes this game stand out is just how realistic the blood and gore is. It's not over the top like a lot of games on the list, but it's still pretty shocking. Seeing the aftermath of a pipe bomb exploding next to a person is like something out of Saving Private Ryan. The attention to detail is what really makes the violence stand out here. Throwing a bottle in someone's face covers them in cuts and glass. Hitting a guy with a baseball bat makes his teeth fly out. People get mangled in pretty horrible but still believable ways. Blood pools and flows realistically on the ground, too. It'll even spray on the ceiling and drip down in certain circumstances. You'd think that the stuff with the infected would be what makes The Last of Us so violent, but that's kind of an afterthought compared to the horrors you can inflict on other people. I don't know, maybe I wouldn't go that far, but it's a really violent game when it wants to be. And finally, at number 1, Mortal Kombat 11. This is the game where the violence in the Mortal Kombat games went from fairly funny to legitimately disgusting. The fatality's always been part of these games, but you can look back, and a lot of them, they look like silly jokes or laughable explosions at bones. As the series evolved, the fatality animations have gotten way more sophisticated, the level of violence more realistic, but at least until Mortal Kombat 10, it was still borderline cartoonish. The characters didn't look real, the violence was over the top goofy, didn't really matter. 11 was a huge jump in fidelity for the series, though. The characters were now modeled after real people. They had expressive faces that didn't look like cartoons. They really looked like human beings, not like silly stop-motion photography of human beings. The tech had improved, and so did the violence. Using gore tech, they were able to create the most disgusting, disturbing fatalities in the series yet. There's some absolutely disgusting stuff here, like the Noob Saibot one where he pulls out the enemy's intestines, or the Baraka one where he shreds someone's face off. Others are more comedic, honestly. But the realistic bodies combined with a much more realistic gore was too much for some people. It was all pretty gross. Sometimes too gross now.
I don't know.
And it seems like the fatalities in Mortal Kombat 1 are just less gross overall. They're still really disgusting, but they're not as bad as 11. When Mortal Kombat fans start saying something's too violent, then yeah, maybe you should go a little easier. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this...
I don't know. As I played Mortal Kombat 11, those fatalities were... I mean, like, I don't know. The blood literally looked like paint. Like, I don't know if it's not that scary. I don't think that's scary. I don't know. I need to search up scary video games. Could maybe make that a reaction of tomorrow? Maybe. But anyways, that's gonna do for this video.